Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have just entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. And it's great to be with you. I'm Gary Michuta, your sensei and host, and we're going to dive into 1 hour of high-impact Catholic apologetics where the rubber of catechesis meets the road of everyday life. And, we try to keep current on this show of interesting news in the area of defending and explaining the faith. And today's show is a good example of that. If you're an avid video watcher on the internet, you may have noticed that there has been a little bit of a rumble about a former megachurch pastor named Francis Chan, who put out a video where he basically says that he's come to believe in the real presence of the Eucharist. And there's all sorts of very interesting things wrapped up in his video. So we're going to have Matt Swaim come on the show. Matt Swaim, of course, you're familiar with his work with the Coming Home Network. He is going to come on. We're going to talk about this surprising admission by this person who's a big name in the megachurch movement, and also some of the implications of his confession. So that's going to be very interesting. Matt's going to be coming on the other side of the break. Also, there's another interesting article, and this is put out by The Nation, and it's an article written by a leftist feminist named Megan McGray, and the article is titled "The Left Case for Fertile Awareness." It's an interesting article because although she's very ardent feminist, I'm sure she's very pro-abortion, pro-death, she nevertheless decided to try NFP and was surprised by the liberating aspect of natural family planning. So that is put out by thenation.com. Check it out. It's interesting. Of course, she's still approaching NFP with a contraceptive mentality. But nevertheless, I think this is a very positive sign in that the Catholic Church, the truth of the Catholic faith, it's true, not just simply a supernatural revelation, but it impacts the way we live. It's good for us, and for some reason, there's this unknown heresy that circles about that, there's a truth for religion and there's a truth for secular life. And some people treat, the truths of faith, it's the faith's moral teachings as somehow inhibiting us in everyday life, when in fact, if anything, it frees us. It's liberating. And so it's an interesting article because, from a feminist perspective, I think kind of opened her eyes to at least one aspect of, the pro-life message. And, God willing, that will spread to other people as well. Their eyes will be open. So lots of very interesting things happening in the news. And lest I forget, I want to give my shout-outs to all my good friends out there in the social media section of the dojo. Welcome all of you watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello. Welcome aboard. Also, I want to welcome all of you listening on radio stations around the United States and around the world, and also via podcast. Welcome aboard, everybody. Great to be with you today. As always, we have our critical thinking exercises we do. And that is to sharpen our critical thinking skills. And that is done by the Finding the Fallacy. And by the way, today's fallacy is the Argumentum ad Populum. Yes, we've been doing a lot of Latin titled fallacies, the Argumentum ad Populum, or the Appeal to People. And we also cover an early church father. Today's early church father isn't an individual, but actually a writing. Which is sometimes the case with the early church fathers, and this particular writing is known as the Apostolic Canons. So we're going to talk about the Apostolic Canons. And, if you are perhaps listening on lunch, or you might not be able to hear the whole program, won't be able to hear Matt Swaim's breakdown of this revelation by Francis Chan, you can always access not only Hands-On Apologetics, but all the great programs that's produced by Virgin Most Powerful at our flagship website, which is Virgin Most Powerful Radio, all one word, .org. Or, of course, you can also access it through our nifty phone app. So if you don't have the Virgin Most Powerful phone app, please download it. And I want to ask everybody, if you could, if you like the program, please subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, we actually have our own YouTube channel, Hands-On Apologetics, or give us a thumbs up, a like. Do all those nifty social media things, because we want to go out. We want this information to be helpful for Catholics and even non-Catholics out there who want to defend and share their love of Christ. So, without further ado, why don't we jump into our critical thinking exercises for today? The finding the fallacy is the Argumentum ad Populum, otherwise known as the appeal to the people, and this fallacious argument that concludes that the proposition must be true because many or most people believe it. So basically it's concisely encapsulated as if many believe it, it is so. Okay. And this is, I think, one of those favorite fallacies used by teenagers. Everybody's doing it, Mom, Dad, Oh, come on, why can't I do it? Everybody's doing it, right? And for us parents, we know the answer to that. It's the old, if everybody's jumping off a cliff response. But, there is some truth to that, because whether or not something is held by 1 million people to be true or held by 1 million people to be false. Now, that ought to give us some reticence, as to, well, how could all these people be wrong? But on the other hand, it doesn't suffice to prove it's true. You can't use it as evidence or arguments. So the Argumentum ad Populum is the thing to watch out whenever somebody says, appeals to, well, it's every scientist believes this, or every scholar holds this position. Like I said, I think we should have some sort of reticence, because after all, we have to be humble as far as to what we know and what our intellectual, prowess really is. So we should be circumspect. But nevertheless, you can't say it must be true because everybody holds it, because that's simply false. Okay. And so I guess if everybody held that the Argumentum ad Populum was not a fallacy, that would not make it true. How's that for a mind twister for you folks? We only give out the gold here at Hands-On Apologetics. Okay, well, why don't we jump to the Meet the Early Church Father for today? Like I said, it's not a individual so much as a writing, important writing. It's the Apostolic Constitutions. It was written sometime around the 400s. Earlier we talked about another early church father writing, which is called the Apostolic Constitutions. Well, this work constitutes the 47th chapter of the 8th book of the so-called Apostolic Constitutions. Apparently, there is a pseudo-Clement of the Apostolic Constitutions who is responsible for this, and also for collecting these canons, which he compiled and appended to the formal work. Now, the Apostolic Canons deal mostly with issues surrounding ordinations, duties, conduct of clergy, and in the form they resemble a conciliar canon. When councils meet, often what they'll do is they'll issue canons, and the canons of councils are disciplinary directives, which specifically point out certain things or ideas that are anathema. Okay, so the Apostolic canons kind of resemble like these conciliar canons that often are tagged on after a decree in a council. And in fact, the first 20 of the 85 apostolic canons, that's true, folks, a lot of 85 canons, are almost verbatim taken from the canons of a council of Antioch that met in 341. Of all the canons of the apostolic canon, the most interesting one has to do with the canonical books of Scripture. And as you know, your sensei has done a lot of research, done a lot of writing on the issue of the Deuterocanon, the 7 Old Testament books that Catholic and Orthodox Bibles include, that Protestant and Jewish Bibles exclude. And this is one of those it really is an oddity of history, is the 85th canon of the Apostolic Canons, because it lists the canonical books, but it mentions 3 books of Maccabees. Okay, so as Catholics, we accept 1st Maccabees and 2nd Maccabees. 3rd Maccabees, however, is somewhat accepted in the Orthodox Church, and nevertheless it finds its way in this 85th canon, and also it omits in the New Testament the book of Revelation. So it's an odd canon indeed, and Jurgens of Faith Early Fathers, which we use for this exercise, Jurgens notes that it's not surprising in the Syrian canon of this period. The author of the work pretends that the list of canons, along with the constitutions, is an apostolic authority, and that it has been written down by Clement, who had been sent it around to all the bishops and priests of the world. So it's not surprising either that he includes in his New Testament canon the letter of Clement to the church in Corinth, known as First Clement, and also the so-called second letter of Clement to the Corinthians. But in addition to these, he also makes some amazing additions, like let's see, the Acts of Us Apostles, instead of saying the Acts of the Apostles, and so on. Is this an apostolic writing? Well, it claims to be apostolic, but scholars believe no, it's not. Obviously, it couldn't be apostolic if it quotes the canons from the Council of Antioch in 341. So that is our Meet the Early Church Father for today, the Apostolic Canons. Coming up on the other side of the break, Master Apologist Matt Swaim is going to be coming on. We're going to talk about Francis Chan's amazing revelatory video. Stay tuned, folks.
Welcome to our January 11th, 2020 Spiritual Warfare Conference. Every year without fail, this is our most popular, well-attended event. This year's Spiritual Warfare Conference will host Adam Bly, a Catholic demonologist, and an auxiliary member of the International Association of Exorcists, along with Dr. Luis Sandoval, a psychiatrist who's part of the Healing, Deliverance, and Exorcism team for the Diocese of Orange. These 2 gentlemen bring tons of experience and expertise in the area of spiritual warfare. This is going to be a high-information Catholic seminar. I'll be there as well, sharing some riveting stories on the diabolical and liberation found through Jesus Christ from my best-selling book, The Devil in the City of Angels. Mark your calendars, come and join us, and meet other radio hosts from Jesus 911. Contrary to popular belief, spiritual warfare is not demon-centered, it's Christ-centered. Come join us and learn how to armor up and fight the good fight of faith. Catholics, wake up. Don't hit the snooze button. Join us at St. Christopher Catholic Church, 629 South Glendora Avenue, West Covina, California, on January 11, 2020. See you then. Strength and honor in Jesus' name.
Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-on Apologetics. Well, if you've been one of those people that surfs videos, religious-related videos, chances are you probably encountered one video that kind of went viral, and that is by a person named Francis Chan, who had a kind of conversion as far as his understanding of the Eucharist, and now he believes in the real presence. And to help us break down this, I guess you could say, revelation of his, is our good friend Matt Swaim. Matt Swaim grew up in a strong Christian home. He attended United Methodist, Nazarene, and Free Methodist congregations along the way. And while studying media communications at Asbury College, he discovered G.K. Chesterton and became at first curious about the Catholic Church and then eventually convicted that he needs to join it. Matt has worked in Catholic radio for nearly a decade before joining the Coming Home Network staff in 2016. His primary role there is working as a coordinate and promote new videos, web, and other media content. And by the way, you can get all the great stuff that the folks at the Coming Home Network puts out at their flagship website, chnetwork.org. And Matt Swaim, welcome to Hands-On Apologetics.
Hey, thanks, Gary. Can I just have you introduce me everywhere I go? You know, like I walk into the place to get my oil changed, and you just run that down for them?
Yeah, but I got to do that. And here's Matt.
Your best Don Pardo Jeopardy intro or whatever it happens to be. Yeah, I'd take it.
Well, hey, it's easy to intro somebody, with such a spectacular bio. So, it's easy for me. By the way, I am available, Matt, with a nominal fee to do just that.
All right. Well, let me look into my my budget and see. We'll see if we can fit you in. See if we can squeeze you into 2021, maybe.
There you go. So, let's talk a little bit about this video. Francis Chan. Who is Francis Chan?
Now, that's the first question that we probably ought to ask here, because if you're a Catholic and you see this video pop on your web page, you're probably thinking, who is this guy? He doesn't seem to – I don't see his audience. Is this like a big deal of a person? The answer is yes. Francis Chan is a huge deal. If you are Protestant, you know who Francis Chan is. He's known for sharing the stage with all kinds of sort of the biggest players. Ravi Zacharias and he have done a bunch of videos together, if you're familiar with that name. He's got kind of an interesting background. I will say this. If you're going to find out about Francis Chan and figure out who he is, don't go to his Wikipedia page right now, because the Reformed people who think that he's betrayed them by doing this video have gone and they've just like made a mess of his Wikipedia page. So
really?
Yeah, don't go there for the information. But if you look at his own biomaterials, he was a former teaching pastor and helped found a church in Simi Valley, California. He actually went to John MacArthur's school for his Master of Divinity, and John MacArthur's pretty well-known in Reformed circles. His dad was a Baptist minister. He's got a lot of formation in this. He apparently went into ministry and then had kind of reconversion in the course of that. He and his wife have 7 kids. This ought to give you kind of a little bit of a picture that this is not like your average normal megachurch pastor. He's gone through a lot of kind of interesting transitions, and one of the things he's really been harping on in the past several years is kind of his dissatisfaction with the way that evangelicalism is sort of comfortable or stagnant or not really preaching the gospel. He's come out against the prosperity gospel. He's resigned from a couple different churches over the years to go do either speaking ministry where he can rev up the crowd a little bit better, or he just in, I think it was November, announced that he was going to resign all that, and he and his wife are going to go be missionaries in like Hong Kong or something.
Yeah.
So this is the guy.
I was going to ask you: is he currently a pastor, or did he resign?
He's a guy who I'm pretty sure what he does is write books and do speaking gigs, and now he's going into, at least until very recently, he was giving away or at least half the profits from his ministry because he's made his money some other way. So this is a guy who has over and over tried to kind of call people to sort of like catch fire. His latest kind of biggest book that people, if you're going to look for any of his books, the ones that'll pop up is called Crazy Love, and it's this whole idea of being more aware of how radical the love of God is for us and how that should inform how radically we should love God. It would be stuff that kind of makes sense a little bit with the message of divine mercy. It would be some of the similar kinds of language, except definitely not all the sort of Catholic buzzwords in it.
Oh, sure.
So that being said, here's a guy who has over and over said that the church is stagnant, the church needs to be kicked in the pants, the church is too driven by comfort and personalities and all these other things. So that's kind of the context of what you need to know about Francis Chan before you watch the video. And if you know that, then a lot of what he's saying makes a lot more sense as to why it is that this is making the kind of waves that it is.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, from the Catholic side, I don't think probably anybody ever heard of him. But from the Protestant side, I know through a lot of my convert friends. Actually, I'd never heard of him before. My convert friends said, "Wow, you got to check out this video."
Yeah,
and it's like, oh wow, I guess this is a big deal.
Well, all these former pastors that come to us through the Coming Home Network, I've been in communication with a few of them, and they're like, "This sounds exactly like me 4 years ago," or one guy who's he was a former assistant pastor at a mega church, emailed me back. He's like, "This sounds like a conversation we had at one of the Coming Home Network retreats, like when I was on my way in. This is the kind of conversations that we were having."
Yeah.
If you haven't seen the video, so Chan says a few different things, and there are a lot of things to unpack. A lot of people think, well, the headline is, this guy is affirming the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. He's not really, if you listen closely. Mm-hmm. What he's saying is that in his study of church history, he's realizing that for the first 1,500 years of Christianity, it wasn't a guy at a podium at front and center in the church. It was a tabernacle. And in that tabernacle, even the leaders and ministers considered themselves at the service of that mystery. And they all believed that it was literally, truly the presence of Jesus' body, blood, soul, and divinity there in the Eucharist. Chan doesn't say, I believe that it is.
Yeah.
He's saying, I just discovered that all these people for 1,500 years believe that it is, and that it was not a ministry that was focused on the personality of the person who was preaching. It was not something that the authority behind that mystery didn't come from the minister's speaking or administrative skills. It came from a mystery that transcended everything in the room. And as I think he says in the video, he said, it's just something to think about. I'm like, yeah, it is, Francis. It's something that turned my own world upside down. Has turned the world of 100 other guys I know upside down for thinking about it. So yeah, he opens a lot of doors just with that one statement. Because when people come to belief in the Eucharist, it's never just that thing. The Eucharist is connected to everything that we believe. So yeah, it's very interesting to hear him open that door in public.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for those who aren't familiar with the megachurch movement, maybe if you could give us a rundown of how it typically would view sacraments and things like that. Because this is and also church history. Like you said, he touches mainly on that.
Well, I'll give you in terms of what the megachurch movement believes about sacraments and church history, that's a two-word answer. They don't. Although even with that, there is no megachurch pope that all the megachurch pastors answer to. And some of them are Reformed in their orientation. Some of them are just Baptist, but they took the Baptist name off the big sign out front, next to the police officer directing traffic every Sunday. There are a lot of them that have that kind of Reformed orientation. There are a lot of them that don't even go that deep. There are a lot of them that are prosperity gospel, and Reformed people in prosperity gospel are notoriously not super friends. Some of them are more Pentecostal. Some of them have even kind of more of like the Wesleyan kind of tradition to them that is more like an emphasis on free will and your own decision making. But at the basis of them is they don't believe that you need to be part of a church to be saved. So sacraments wouldn't be like a thing, right? And if you don't need to be part of a church to be saved, why does it matter what church was like until now? What matters is, are you in relationship with God?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
So this is not something that they're like intentionally pushing aside any more than I've intentionally tried not to learn Chinese, Gary. It's like it's just something that's not ever been seen as an important thing. It's like, this is the difference between the hardcore atheists who like left the left Christianity because they didn't like their fundamentalist parents, and the nuns. These guys rejected Christianity because they didn't like it. The nuns, they're like, well, I've never seen any reason to think about whether or not to believe in God. I just live. And that's the approach that they take to something like church history or the sacraments. It's not even like a question that occurs to them to ask. It wasn't for me, right? What mattered is 15, 17 and onward.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, that's a really good way to put it too, because that means that, people wonder, well, why is this so explosive? Well, the fact that this is even on the radar screen is explosive.
Yeah.
Because if you follow the natural implications of, him making that statement about, caring about church history and how was worship orientated and even, talking about the real presence of the Eucharist, just him broaching that subject is, I don't know, I guess you could, I wouldn't say anathema, but it would just be so foreign, to that type of Protestantism.
It would be a lot crazier if I didn't work in the particular job that I do, which is founded by a Presbyterian pastor who became Catholic and who was classmates with Scott Hahn and who has welcomed hundreds of Protestant pastors and aired hundreds of, over 1,000 Journey Home episodes at this point. It would be crazier if I wasn't in this line of work. But it kind of makes sense, though, because think about it. If you are a pastor who is genuinely seeking God and genuinely wants to continue to dig deeper into the faith and into the scriptures, one of these days you're going to read something old, right? Or one of these days you're going to think, but maybe I ought to look at a book that I've never seen before to get a fresh perspective on this. And you might pick up, John Chrysostom's homilies or something. And you're like, well, I don't know what he's talking about here, but I'm curious. It makes sense that someone who's a spiritual seeker would do this. And it also makes sense because of at least with Chan, this sort of ongoing dissatisfaction he's expressed with evangelicalism, in the sense that his experience of authority has been people who speak with an air of authority about them, right? So you get authority because you're John MacArthur and you've sold a lot of books, right? Or you get authority because you're John Piper and everybody listens when you talk. Like, that's the basis for your authority. And for him to come to this realization that there were guys like St. Bernardine of Siena who were preaching and converting people by the thousands, but he was doing it in the streets of Siena. Right. It's a very different thing to understand that the focus of worship was liturgical and sacramental.
Very good. Yeah, we're chatting with Matt Swaim. We're going to unpack this revelation of Francis Chan, so stay tuned, everybody. Listen to Hands On Apologetics.
This is Matthew Arnold inviting you to listen to Happy Hour on Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Every week I offer reflections on the Sunday readings of the extraordinary form of the Mass and take a traditional look at the many challenges facing Catholics today. Drawing on Scripture and medieval sources like the Imitation of Christ, I'll help you on your personal quest for spiritual perfection so that you can find true happiness in holiness. Check out Happy Hour live every Friday from noon to 1 p.m. Pacific Time on our Virgin Most Powerful Radio YouTube channel or our VMPR smartphone app. It's easy to download the app to your phone from the App Store or when you visit our website, vmpr.org. That's Happy Hour live every Friday at noon or anytime on demand. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio, and it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Master Apologist Matt Swaim about the latest revelations of Francis Chan, a megachurch pastor who kind of has a video out where he discloses some thoughts he has about the early church and the Eucharist that has caused quite a storm. So, Matt, why don't we kind of break down some of the implications of some of the things he says in the video?
Well, it's kind of interesting in that it started a lot of controversy. There are a lot of people who are like, well, I've never studied the first 1,500 years of Christianity either. Are you sure that's what they thought? And there are several people who are kind of coming back at him and saying, well, that shows what you know about church history. Obviously it was all about personal relationship until the medievals corrupted it. So you've got a bunch of that going on. And you've got a bunch of Reformed people who saying, Francis Chan is a false teacher. He's affirming the idolatry of the Mass and all these other things. Because bear in mind that John Calvin said, among other things, that the Mass was the highest form of idolatry, right? And that kind of latent anti-Catholicism, even if it's not overt, is kind of at the back of the minds of a lot of Reformed and Baptist theology. They may not sit there and do sermons about why the Catholic Church is the Antichrist, but they will say things like, you don't need some organized religion mediating your relationship with God. It's about you and Jesus. And usually by that they mean the Catholic Church. So the very idea that Chan would be saying something, and I don't think he even uses the word Catholic in this, at least in the shorter clip that goes around. I don't think he even uses the word Catholic.
Think he does either.
He's saying basically Christians.
Yeah, he mentions a group that he's been meeting with, and in the group, he may mention Catholics in the group. But he might also mention Orthodox and some other Christians. So.
But Orthodox would affirm that teaching on the Eucharist too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So I think he does mention it at the very beginning, if I remember correctly. But you bring up a good point, because Calvin was the one who, renovated the church in Geneva, where he basically whitewashed all the walls and put, the lectern center so that people could focus on the Word of God, and, basically reduced the altar to a table that just was functional only. Because
also, you would not have wanted to be caught drinking or dancing in Geneva when Calvin was in charge. You would not. That would not have been good for you.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of, he was responsible in a big way, Zwingli as well, for kind of stripping of the altars and making the pulpit the focus. So in a real way, I think his comments are very much pointed towards Calvin and Zwingli.
And actually, what's very interesting is that I believe it was Zwingli that during one of the early debates among the Reformers, I think Luther reduced Zwingli to tears in a debate over the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, because Zwingli was not on board, and Luther was basically calling him every name in the book, saying, "You idiot, of course it's Jesus." I mean, Zwingli and Calvin were kind of like let's purge all images, all sacraments. I mean, there's a reason that Lutheran churches today look and sound more like Catholic churches than say, for instance, a Baptist church would.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so in a way, his comments kind of focus in that area. So I could see where the Reformed would be particularly offended.
Yeah, and again, bear in mind that what Chan is saying is bothering a lot of people because he's it's not that he's saying something that upsets what a lot of people believe. Mm-hmm. It's that he's referring to a thing that a lot of people have never thought about, and they don't know how to debate him because they don't. It's like it's hard to even. It'd be like somebody talking about. Well, I don't even know what the analogy is for it. You're tapping into something that's completely unknown to people.
Yeah.
Like they're like, if you ask the average evangelical Christian, so how did Christians pray and worship and sing in like 850 AD? Like, what would be their point of reference to even know how to answer that question? It's not because they think that's horrible and we should suppress it. It's just that it's never really come up.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I never heard anything preached on it. Like, so to give you an example, when I worked for many years at Family Christian Store through late high school and in college, I ran the punk rock and alternative and metal section at the Christian bookstore. It was a very niche market. We were rocking hard, but I still stocked the books in the other areas, including the Christian classics area. And Christian classics were like the greatest hits of the 1800s, 1900s, and today. I mean, that was it. I mean, the classics were those guys, and they were all guys, and they were all white, right? You wouldn't find like this international, mosaic of theologians from Greece and North Africa and missionaries to Japan in the 15th century and all these that constituted this global church. Right? Because you thought of yourself as this remnant that restarted sometime 500 years ago.
Yeah.
So Chan is not just saying, let's rethink how we do Holy Communion. He's touching a nerve for a lot of people who have that gap in their knowledge, and just some of them are kind of ashamed of it.
Yeah.
Like, because it's
in effect,
now that they discovered
the mega church didn't exist, for the first 1,500 years.
Yeah, it did. It was 1 billion strong, and it's 1 billion strong today.
Yeah.
I mean, we are the mega church, right? We just
that's true.
Not all in the same room.
Right. Yeah. No, it's hard to convey, what kind of impact that is. It would almost be I don't even know if there could be a Catholic parallel, but it would basically be an apostasy. Like, hey, you know what? I learned that no one practiced Catholicism for the first 1,500 years, and it was all megachurch. It was just a person that had preaching the gospel, and there wasn't the Eucharist.
Except these are how these revelations go down with us. It's like, oh my gosh, how have I lived my whole life and nobody's told me about Carmelite spirituality? Yeah. This is this incredible thing, and like, it's never been on my radar, and people are hiding it. Except when we find that stuff out, we're like, Carmelite spirituality belongs to us too? When they found something like that out, they're like, this isn't ours. That's not us.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't look at all like us. And that's kind of a scary thing, because it's not the same thing as like finding out that Jesus didn't really rise from the dead or something like that. But it is finding out that you don't have this long historical thing that you thought you had. Mm-hmm. Because, for me, and bear in mind that in my own experience and how I address this question, it comes from me being raised in Free Methodist and Nazarene and shortly in a United Methodist and eventually in a church planting house kind of environment. That the impression was, well, early Christians met together in houses and they prayed and sang and they ate meals together. Right? Mm-hmm. But then, and so if you have that impression, why study the history? I mean, it says in the book of Acts that they got together and broke bread and prayed. But if you do the research, well, what did the breaking of the bread mean? What did the prayers look like? There's this kind of impression that sort of almost removes the need to even look at the history. So a lot of people think they kind of know what the church was like, but never even looked to see if that's what it actually was like.
Yeah. It was just an unquestioned assumption going in, and so he questions it. So
God bless him for it. I'll tell you this: when I first had that kind of realization that he's like articulating in this video, my initial impulse was, all right, we're shutting this down. Right? The end. I don't like what I'm finding. It's probably better if I just keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, it was a blue pill moment or red pill?
It was. That's exactly where you. I mean, you're like in the Matrix, and you're like, maybe it's just better for me to not know that I'm plugged into some machine, incubating. And this is the case actually with a lot of people who come to the Coming Home Network who are kind of in this sort of no man's land. They know enough to know that the Catholic Church is right about more than they realized.
Yeah.
But they're kind of afraid to crack that door to see if they really are right about all of that other stuff too.
Right.
And that's really the realization that washed over me. It's like, well, what else might they be right about? And that's, you can almost see it in Chan's eyes in the video. Like, what else did I not notice?
Yeah.
Because I'm only reading living guys.
A real important implication of what he says is that Christians didn't worship like this for 1,500 years, and that's a problem. He wasn't just throwing out a factoid. It's like, there's something wrong here with the math. Why is it that Christianity worshiped that way? It's completely reversed way that we worship. How could it possibly
have gotten people to come if they didn't have some great speaker every Sunday?
Yeah, and the implication is that history matters, which I think is also a huge bomb.
Yeah, it is a huge bomb. But it also, again, we are so focused on the talents of the pastor. I mean, and this is actually something that we've kind of caught from, the joke is that when Protestantism sneezes, Catholicism catches a cold, right? In terms of like some of the things that happen in our own liturgy and worship. I mean, think about how many things that we've tried to do to sort of adapt to kind of be as cool as the church down the road. And, again, he's criticizing Protestant churches for having pulpits in the middle and front and the tabernacle not being the focus of worship. We could do a better job of that in some of our places too. Right. Sure. Where the tabernacle is off in a broom closet somewhere. But again, this crisis of authority is a big thing that causes a lot of people to come to us, because so Marcus talks about this in his own story. I'm sitting here preaching on this passage, you'll say, and I know that within like a 10-mile radius of me, if all the other preachers around had to preach off the same passage too, some of them would be saying stuff that's very different than what I'm saying. And all that people have to go on is the fact that they trust me. Mm-hmm. And that's all the people in the other congregations have to go off of too, is the fact that they trust the guy who's talking to them. Do I trust the guy? Do I trust myself? And if so, what basis do I have for trusting myself? I say it's the Bible, but is that enough? Is it just my own? Is it just my own head, my own ideas?
Yeah, very good. Well, we're chatting with Matt Swaim about Francis Chan's Revelations. More to come on the other side of the break, folks.
This is Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio. This March, VMPR, in association with the Catholic Resource Center, will be hosting a special conference for the Adoramus Society. Adoramus at the Triduum, a conference on the spirituality of the Triduum liturgies, featuring speakers Father Joseph Fessio, Dr. Anthony Lillis, and Christopher Carstens, addressing such topics as developing a liturgical spirituality, the spirituality of Holy Thursday, the spirituality of Good Friday, and the spirituality of the Paschal Vigil and Easter season. It all takes place March 14, 2020, at the historic Sacred Heart Chapel at 381 West Center Street, Covina, California, 91723. You can register online at vmpr.org or call now at 877-526-2151 to reserve your seat today for Adoramus at the Triduum. Jesus said in Luke 17, "When you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are unprofitable servants. We have only done our duty.'" According to St. John of the Cross, God is pleased with the little deeds we do in secret. He takes more pleasure in these than in a multitude of grand works that we may do out of the desire to be seen by others. May God help us to do the things that please Him, and not just to appear great in the eyes of others.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE, US 1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-on Apologetics. We are breaking down Francis Chan's video where he talks about his discovery of the worship of the early church. And Matt, let's kind of unpack some of the implications of his discovery, because I think if people discover the ancient church, that has lots of implication as far as apostolic succession, church government, teaching authority. But to have this connected with the Eucharist, there are lots of implications to, the Eucharist being the center of worship.
Yeah, and so bear in mind that everybody's on a journey, right? And so the fact that he's saying this does not mean that he is ready to come into the Catholic Church and, acknowledge the authority of the Pope and all this other stuff. He's, as we said at the beginning of this, just acknowledged that he realizes that this is what the first century and a half of Christianity everybody believed. And as a lot of incorrect reports are circulating, Catholics are the only people who hold to this now. Well, no, the Orthodox hold to this too, right? It's the basis for us being able to talk to the Orthodox about so many other things. I've talked to people who are in this process before, who come from a ministry background, who haven't put the two and two together on the apostolic succession part of it. Like, this only works because a priest is doing it who had hands laid on him by a bishop, who had hands laid on him by a bishop, all the way back to the apostles.
Yeah.
And so you get guys who are like, wait, this whole time have I been throwing away the actual body and blood of Jesus when we're done with our communion service? So you have there are a lot of things that kind of go through a person's head once they start to make this discovery. Like, am I guilty of profaning the body and blood of Christ when we dump the rest of the Welches down the drain after our quarterly communion service? So he hasn't indicated at all that he's really gotten the apostolic succession bit of this. But with that, is also part of this whole question of authority. I think he's really struggling on the question of authority. And that's why this came up in the first place, is what is the center of Christian worship? Is it the smart words of some guy who happens to be a good public speaker? Or is it Jesus? And that smart guy might say, this is all about Jesus. But that thought's going to always nag that smart guy if he's serious and humble and honest with himself. Where does real authority come from? Is it my preaching skill, or is it something that is there? Can Christian worship exist in a right and just way if I only talk for like 30 seconds, right? And we've a lot of us have been to daily masses where like the priest just gets up and says, please remain standing for the petitions. There's your homily, right? We understand that the homily it's nice when you get a good one, but that's not why we're there. And so I think he's processing a lot of like, what is the function of Christian worship? Who has the authority to do these things? Why are we even meeting in a room every week if God is so personal? And again, these are questions that nag a lot of evangelicals who think about this, on a deeper level and are trying to grow. That's the kind of stuff that got me going, right? Is why should I go to this guy's church instead of this guy's church, if it's just about hearing a talk, then I can download a podcast or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, with your experience with the Coming Home Network, what impact do you think a video like this would have on, on Protestants in general? I mean, all points of the journey, the beginners and those who haven't even started.
Yeah. Well, I think, the good thing about an argument or seeing something you disagree with on the internet is that you want to have the ammunition to take it down. And, of course, we have hundreds of conversion stories from people who set out to disprove the Catholic Church and now they're Catholic. So, you got that going for you.
Sure, right.
But also I think it's kind of like when the HHS mandate came down, and Protestants who were upset about religious liberty questions in a larger sense started kind of joining our side on this HHS mandate that, that religious employers would have to provide contraception. They're like, well, contraception is not really a moral issue for us, but if they're going to attack the Catholics, who else are they going to attack? So let's stand with the Catholics. And in the course of that, a lot of really interesting questions about Humana Vitae and like other Catholic associated stuff related to human life and contraception came up among these Protestants. And we're showing up in Christianity Today and Relevant Magazine and all these things that Protestants read. So the fact that this is popping up will maybe even get some internal discussions going with some of these. I mean, I know they're already happening because my Facebook feed is inundated with them. And my goal is just to not get involved because I like to kind of watch and just sort of see what some of my friends are saying. But it certainly started a conversation. I mean, there's no question about that.
Yeah. So it possibly could, help to explain why somebody who belongs to a megachurch movement, that there's just something that's not quite right there. Do you think it'd make an impact on those who have already kind of started looking into church history, that type of thing, a little further in the?
Yeah, I think it could because, the other power of this is that he articulates something that's nagged a lot of people, right? Sometimes you just need to hear somebody else say it out loud, right? Yeah. And this is kind of the power of telling conversion stories, right? The power of telling your own story, whoever you are, of coming back to the church. Sometimes people just need to hear out loud what they're hearing in their own head.
Right.
I think that's a big part.
Yeah, that's a big point. I mean, me, I'm a conversion junkie, so.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm always on, the chnetwork.org, watching conversions, watching on television, because I find the whole, God's mystery of conversion to be fascinating. And you're right, so many times, even with Marcus, it was him listening to Scott Hahn on I think it was an audio cassette.
Ken Hensley the same way, who's on your show all the time. I mean, like sometimes you just need to hear somebody say something out loud that has been haunting you, and you couldn't put your finger on what it was that was bothering you.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the great gift of noted apologists like C.S. Lewis or G.K. Chesterton. They put into words this thing that like you had a sense of, but you're like, that's it right there. That's the words I've been looking for. Yeah, so that, that's a big part of it. But again, bear in mind that there's this growing angst, and there are a number of factors in this. Some of them are political. Some of them are people watching their own children walk away from the faith that they instilled. And there are a lot of things. Evangelicalism is in a major identity crisis right now. There is no evangelical pope for them to like or get mad at. It's just the popular, interesting guy in the big building down the street from you.
Yeah.
And that, guess what? That doesn't just bother you. That bothers the popular guy down the street from you. Yeah. So yeah, I have really great hopes. And if Francis is watching this, I also hope that he knows that he's not the first person to have these crazy ideas. There's like an ocean of people who have the same kind of formation that he had, who've had the same evangelistic impulses that he has had, who have had the similar leadership, although probably not on the same scale as he has, who have asked the same questions he's asking, and were at first embarrassed, at second curious and fascinated, at third, terrified, and at fourth, excited that it led them to the Catholic Church. So.
Yeah. Deacon Alex Jones, may rest in peace. When he converted,
great example of this, by the way.
Yeah, he took half of his church, into the Catholic Church. Do you think that, not to say that Chan would convert, but if he does move closer to Catholicism, do you think he would have that same kind of influence, or is it a different kind of ministry between, Pentecostal and a megachurch pastor?
Well, it's kind of weird because his ministry is writing and speaking at conferences and things like that. So defining his followers is like nailing Jello to a tree or something like that. So
okay.
He doesn't have like a congregation that shows up every Sunday to hear him talk, who's going to be like, well, the church board has voted you out as pastor because you said these things. I mean, he's kind of got his own sort of ministry. I don't know. It's always difficult to say because, we've talked to people, especially in the age of the ordinariate, who have become, they were an Anglican priest on Thursday. By Sunday, they're a Catholic priest. And by Sunday afternoon, 3/4 of their previous congregation is being confirmed, right, in the same building. But everybody's still on their own individual journey.
Yeah.
And you can't take that for granted. And again, bear in mind that it's just, some people this happens in a flash. And some people this is like a 10 or 12 year process. It was like 6 or 7 for me once I started having these ideas. Because it's one thing to have all the ingredients, another thing to know, if I put these together in the right way, it makes a pizza.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's a very good point, too. So, we should keep him and all those that follow him in our prayers. And, God willing, open his eyes to other things about this historic church, maybe come home. So, Matt, with the last couple of minutes we have left, why don't we talk a little bit about your ministry, Coming Home Network? How are things going over there?
It's exciting. It's really exciting. We're starting, we're in the middle of I think it's our 23rd year of doing episodes of The Journey Home. And of course the Apostolate's older than that. And it's just really neat to, I've joked about it on your show before. It's like Easter every day around here because you get to all day talk to these people who are like just figuring this stuff out and they're excited. They're about 3 steps ahead of where Francis Chan is right now.
Sure.
And you get to help people on this path of discovery, and it reminds you, what it was like when you had that kind of discovery. And so I encourage people who are not already, plugged in with us to get involved because we have an online community where people can help people who are actively searching and excited. We have, of course, a newsletter with new conversion stories in it, where it has prayer requests for these people who are on the journey and looking for help. I think it's very easy to fixate on what this cleric said or that bishop did or whatever, and think that this is what the church is whatever this bad headline is.
Yeah.
Guess what, man? My inbox is flooded with crazy good news about the church every day.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, folks, check it out. And the website is chnetwork.org, and it's a great website. Check it out because Matt Swaim, you're doing a great job over there. Keep up the good work.
Hey, thanks, man. It's a team effort. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Matt Swaim, everybody. And, check it out. And, boy, this is the fastest hour on Catholic Talk Radio, I swear. Seems like we just got started, and already I'm hearing the final music. Coming up next, High Impact Catholic Talk, coming at you with the Terry and Jesse Show. And it's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center here, turn off the dojo lights. Thank you so much for tuning in. And God willing, we'll talk again tomorrow with Paul Thomas. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.